She was serving at the Billionaire'S mansion party when she saw her childhood photo in a black frame and he froze. Grace Mitchell had learned to be invisible, 27 years on this earth, and she'd perfected the art of moving through rooms without drawing attention. Eyes down, steps quiet, presence forgettable. It was a survival skill honed over 22 years in the foster care system, where being noticed usually meant trouble. Tonight was no different. She weaved through the crowd of Los Angeles elites at the Langford mansion. Champagne flutes balanced perfectly on her silver tray, her black uniform crisp and anonymous. The mansion was obscene in its luxury. Italian marble floors that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers dripping light like frozen waterfalls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens that stretched into darkness. The guests were the usual crowd. Tech moguls in $1,000 suits discussing their third vacation homes. Socialites with faces pulled tight by expensive surgeons, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Real estate developers like Robert Langford, the host, whose empire had transformed the La skyline. Grace served them all with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She didn't belong here. She never belonged anywhere. Really. That was the truth she'd carried since she was 5 years old. Her earliest memories were fragments, pieces of a puzzle she'd long given up trying to solve. The sweet smell of jasmine, a man's voice singing lullabies in a language she couldn't quite place. Spanish. Maybe. And the necklace, always the necklace. Grace's hand instinctively moved to her collarbone, where a small silver sunflower hung on a delicate chain. It was the only thing she had from before the bus station in Phoenix, Arizona, where a police officer found her alone, clutching the necklace, unable to tell anyone her name, before the state decided to call her Grace, because she needed something on the paperwork, before the orphanages, the foster homes that didn't work out, the group homes where survival meant learning to fight, or learning to disappear. She'd chosen to disappear. More champagne here. A woman in a dress that cost more than Grace's rent waved her over impatiently. Grace glided across the room, refilled the glass, and vanished back into the crowd. Invisible. Safe. But then she saw it. Above the marble fireplace, in a frame of black velvet that seemed to absorb light, hung a photograph. Grace's feet stopped moving without her permission. The champagne flutes trembled on her tray. The girl in the photo was maybe 5 years old. Brown curly hair, almond-shaped eyes, a smile that hadn't yet learned about disappointment. But that wasn't what made Grace's heart slam against her ribs. It was the necklace. The little girl wore a silver sunflower on a delicate chain, identical to the one Grace clutched every night before sleep. Identical in every impossible way. Grace's vision narrowed. The room's noise, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the string quartet in the corner, faded to white static. Her hands started shaking. The tray tilted. The crash of crystal exploding against marble was deafening. 200 heads turned in perfect unison. The string quartet stopped mid-note. Champagne spread across the floor like spilled gold, glass shards glittering under the chandelier light, and Grace stood frozen in the center of it all. Finally, catastrophically visible. For God's sake! A man's voice cut through the silence, sharp with irritation. Robert Langford turned from his conversation with a group of investors, his jaw tight with the kind of anger rich men get when their perfect evenings are interrupted by staff incompetence. He was 53 but looked older, his face carved with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried too long. His eyes were hard, his mouth a slash of disapproval. But when those eyes found Grace, everything changed. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. His expression shifted from anger to shock to something that looked like he'd been punched in the chest. He grabbed the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. "No," the word came out barely above a whisper. "That's not possible." Grace couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from this stranger who was staring at her like she was a ghost. Robert took a stumbling step forward, then another. His hand was shaking as he raised it, pointing at her throat, at the necklace. That necklace. His voice cracked. "Where did you get that necklace?" Grace's hand flew to the sunflower, protective. I don't... Where did you get it?" The question came out desperate, almost violent in its intensity. The room had gone tomb silent. Everyone was watching. "I've always had it," Grace managed. her voice small. "Since I was little, I don't know where it came from." Robert was crossing the distance between them now, moving like a man in a dream or a nightmare. Up close, Grace could see tears forming in his eyes. His whole body was trembling. "Sophie," the name came out broken. "My Sophie. Sir, my name is Grace Mitchell. I don't... That necklace." Robert's voice rose, cracked completely. "I had it specially made. There's only one in the entire world. I gave it to my daughter on her 5th birthday. The day she disappeared, 22 years ago." The room tilted. Grace felt her knees go weak. "That's impossible," she whispered. But Robert was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face in front of 200 of Los Angeles' elite who would gossip about this for months. He didn't seem to care. "Your eyes? You have her eyes? You have my eyes." His hand reached out, stopped inches from her face, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he touched her. "How old are you?" 27. "Do you remember anything? Anything from when you were 5? Grace's mind was spinning. The jasmines, the lullaby, the bus station where it all began, or ended. "I was found in Phoenix, in a bus station, alone, no-eyed, no family. The police said I couldn't tell them my name." Robert made a sound like he'd been shot. His legs gave out. He would have fallen if 2 men in suits hadn't caught him. "Phoenix," he breathed. "We searched Phoenix for months. How did we miss you? How did I miss you?" Across the room, partially hidden by a marble column, a woman watched the scene unfold with growing horror etched across her perfect features. Laura Pierce, 38, Robert's fiancée of 3 years, engagement ring glittering on her left hand. Her eyes moved from Robert to Grace to the necklace, and something cold and calculating settled behind her carefully maintained expression. She'd spent 3 years patiently working her way into Robert Langford's life. 3 years playing the understanding girlfriend, the supportive partner, the woman who could handle his grief. 3 years positioning herself to access a $500 million fortune, and now this waitress, this nobody, was about to destroy everything. Laura's hand tightened around her champagne glass until her knuckles went white. Robert was still on his knees in front of Grace, sobbing like a man who'd just found something he thought was dead and buried. "I need to know," he said, looking up at her with desperate hope. "I need to know if you're her. If you're my daughter, will you let me? DNA test, please. I'm begging you." Grace looked down at this broken stranger, at the photograph above the fireplace, at the impossible necklace around her neck. Her world was ending and beginning all at once, and she had no idea which terrified her more. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Okay." The DNA test took 15 minutes to administer and 3 days to process. Those 72 hours stretched into the longest wait of Grace's life, which was saying something. Considering she'd spent 22 years waiting to understand who she was, Robert had insisted she stay at the mansion. "Please," he'd said, his voice still raw from crying in front of 200 guests who'd scattered like roaches when the lights came on. "I have 12 bedrooms. You can have your pick. I need you close, in case you disappear again." The fear in his voice had been so naked, so genuine, that Grace couldn't refuse. Now she sat in a guest room that was bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, staring at walls covered in silk fabric that probably cost more per square foot than her monthly salary. The bed was ridiculous, a California king with sheets that felt like water against her skin. The bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in and a shower with 6 different heads. It was suffocating. Grace had grown up in rooms shared with 5 other girls, sleeping on donated mattresses, showering in communal bathrooms where you learned to be fast or go without hot water. Luxury wasn't comfort. It was a reminder of everything she'd never had, never been. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's face, the hope and devastation warring in his expression. She heard his voice breaking on the name Sophie. Was she Sophie? Could she be at 2 a.m. on the first night? Grace gave up on sleep and wandered downstairs. The mansion was different in darkness, less oppressive, more like a museum after closing. Her bare feet were silent on the marble floors as she drifted through rooms filled with expensive things that meant nothing. She found herself back in the main hall, staring up at the photograph above the fireplace. The little girl with her necklace smiled down at her, frozen at 5 years old, forever happy. That was taken the morning she disappeared. Grace spun around. A man stood in the doorway, mid-40s, solid build, wearing dark pants and a fitted shirt that suggested he was used to moving fast if he needed to. His face was weathered but kind, his eyes observant without being invasive. "Sorry," he said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Didn't mean to scare you. I'm Evan Cole, head of security. Mr. Langford asked me to keep an eye on things while you're here. To protect me, or to make sure I don't steal the silverware?" Grace asked, more sharply than she intended. Evan's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "To protect you, and to make sure you're comfortable. Which, judging by the fact that you're down here at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping, you're not." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "It's just a lot." "Yeah." Evan moved into the room, but kept his distance, respecting her space. "I imagine it is." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking up at the photograph. "What was she like?" Grace asked quietly. "Sophie, before whatever happened." Evan shook his head. "I wasn't here then. I started working for Mr. Langford 15 years ago. Sophie had already been gone for 7 years by then." He paused. "But I've watched what her absence did to him. That's its own kind of story." "What do you mean?" "Come on." Evan gestured toward the kitchen. "I'll make coffee, and if you want to know about Robert Langford, I can tell you what I've seen." The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and white marble, but Evan moved through it with familiar ease. He made coffee in a French press. Real coffee, not the instant crap Grace was used to, and they sat at the island while the house settled around them. "When I started working here," Evan began, "Mr. Langford was a different man. I mean, he was already broken, but he was functional, built his business back up after Sophie disappeared, threw himself into work like it could save him." What changed? His second wife, Melissa, Sophie's mother, she left him 6 months after the disappearance, took half his fortune in the divorce, and disappeared to the East Coast. Blamed him for not protecting their daughter, for not finding her. The marriage was already dead, but losing Sophie killed whatever was left. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug. He remarried. 3 years ago, woman named Laura Pierce, lawyer, smart, beautiful, patient. She seemed to understand his grief. Evan's expression shifted slightly, something guarded moving behind his eyes. "They're supposed to get married in 2 months. You don't like her." It wasn't a question. Evan took a long moment before answering. "I don't trust her. There's a difference." He met Grace's eyes. "But that's not your problem. You've got enough to deal with." Over the next 3 days, those 2 a.m. conversations became routine. Grace couldn't sleep. Evan was always there. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Evan told her about his time in the military, tours overseas that he didn't talk about in detail, but that had clearly left marks. "You learn things in war," he said one night, "about who people really are when everything falls apart. Some people break. Some people find out they're stronger than they thought. Some people just survive." "Which one were you?" Grace asked. "All 3. Grace found herself sharing things she normally kept locked tight. About the orphanages where staff saw kids as problems to manage, not people to care for. About foster homes that took her in for the monthly check and made sure she knew she wasn't really wanted. About learning that the only person she could count on was herself. "That's lonely," Evan said simply. "Yeah." Grace's voice was quiet. "Yeah, it is." On the 3rd morning, Robert barely slept either. Evan had watched him pace the halls, check his phone obsessively, drink too much scotch and then pour it down the sink like he was ashamed. The man who'd built a real estate empire worth $500 million was coming apart at the seams over a DNA test. Laura Pierce watched it all from the sidelines. She stayed at the mansion, playing the supportive fiancé, but Grace noticed how her smiles never quite reached her eyes, how she asked careful questions about Grace's past, about what she remembered, about whether she'd told anyone else about the necklace, how her gaze lingered on the photograph above the fireplace like she wanted to burn it, on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The call came. Grace was in the library with Evan, who was teaching her to play chess, something to keep your mind occupied. When Robert burst through the door, his face was pale, his hand shaking as he held his phone. "The results are in," he said. "They're sending them over now. The next 10 minutes felt like drowning. They gathered in Robert's study. Grace, Robert, Evan standing quietly by the door, and Laura, who'd appeared from somewhere with perfect timing. Robert's laptop sat on his massive desk. Email program open. Inbox refreshing every few seconds. When the message appeared, Robert stared at it for a long moment, his finger hovering over the mouse. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "If it's yes, if it's no, either way, everything changes." "Open it," Grace said. Her own heart was trying to break through her ribs. "We need to know," Robert clicked. The document loaded. Medical terminology, reference numbers, columns of data that meant nothing to Grace. But at the bottom, in bold letters, probability of paternity, 99.9%. The room seemed to stop breathing. Robert made a sound like he'd been holding his breath for 22 years and could finally exhale. He stood up, stumbled around the desk, and dropped to his knees in front of Grace's chair. "Sophie," he sobbed. "My Sophie, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't find you. I looked every single day of my life. And Grace, who'd learned not to cry in the orphanages because tears made you weak, who'd built walls so high nothing could hurt her, shattered completely." She slid out of the chair onto the floor and let this stranger who was her father hold her while they both cried for everything they'd lost. Evan turned away, giving them privacy, but Grace saw him wipe his eyes. Laura stood frozen by the window, her face carefully blank, but her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Behind her perfect mask, something cold and desperate was calculating, planning, refusing to accept what had just happened. 3 years of work, 3 years of patient manipulation, and now this waitress, this ghost from the past, was going to take everything. Laura excused herself quietly. Nobody noticed her leave. In his study, Robert held his daughter, his Sophie, his Grace, and for the first time in 22 years, let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, some things that were lost could be found. He had no idea that the real nightmare was just beginning. The media circus started before sunrise. Grace woke to the sound of helicopters. She stumbled to the window and pulled back the curtains to find news vans lining the street outside the mansion gates. Cameras with telephoto lenses pointed at every window, reporters doing stand-ups on the sidewalk. "Lost heiress found serving champagne at father's gala," screamed the headline on her phone. Someone had leaked the story overnight. Below it, a photo of her in her waitress uniform. Looking startled and small next to Robert's wealth, she felt sick. "I'm sorry." Robert stood in her doorway, looking like he hadn't slept. "I don't know who talked, but I've got lawyers working on it. We'll get them away from the house." "You can't," Grace said quietly. "This is news. A $500 million heiress who spent 22 years in foster care. They're not going away." Robert's face crumpled. "I should have protected you better. Even now, I'm failing. You didn't know I existed 3 days ago." Grace turned from the window. "You can't protect me from everything." But Robert was already trying. By noon, he'd hired a PR firm, a security company, and what he called a life coordinator to help Grace adjust to her new circumstances. He'd opened credit cards in her name with no limits. He'd had a jeweler come to the house with trays of diamonds. He'd ordered a Tesla and had it delivered to the driveway with a bow on it. Grace wanted to scream. "Stop," she finally said when he presented her with keys to a penthouse apartment he'd just purchased in her name. They were in his study, and she'd had enough. "Just stop." Robert looked wounded. "I'm trying to give you everything you should have had. Everything I couldn't give you for 22 years. You can't buy those years back." The words exploded out of her. "You can't throw money at this and make it okay. I grew up sharing a room with 5 other kids. I wore donated clothes. I learned to pick locks because sometimes the group home staff forgot to unlock the kitchen and we were hungry. You can't erase that with a Tesla." Robert's face went pale. "I know, I don't know what else to do." Grace felt immediately guilty. "I know you're trying, but I need time. I need to figure out who I am now, because I've been Grace Mitchell for 22 years, and I don't know how to be Sophie Langford." "You don't have to be Sophie," Robert said quietly. "Sophie was 5 years old. She's gone. But you're here, and I want to know you. Grace, not the daughter I lost, the woman you became. It was the first thing he'd said that actually helped. Laura appeared in the doorway, perfectly composed in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Grace used to make in a month. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Robert said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Laura smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Grace, I was thinking, you must be overwhelmed with all the legal aspects of this situation. Identity documents, inheritance issues, tax implications. I'd love to help. That's what I do." Grace studied her. Laura had been nothing but polite since the DNA results came back, but something felt off, like she was acting a part and occasionally forgot her lines. "That's kind of you," Grace said carefully. "I mean it. You're going to be part of this family. We should get to know each other." Laura's smile widened. "Maybe we could have lunch, just us girls." Before Grace could answer, Evan's voice came from behind Laura. "Mr. Langford, security needs to discuss the new protocols." Laura's expression flickered, just for a second, with something cold, before smoothing back into pleasant neutrality. "Of course, I'll leave you to it." She touched Grace's arm lightly. "Think about lunch." When she left, Evan caught Grace's eye. The message was clear. Be careful. That night, Grace couldn't take the suffocation anymore. She needed to do something, to feel like herself instead of this helpless heiress everyone was trying to create. So she did what she'd always done when she needed answers. She went looking for them herself. She waited until after midnight, slipped out of the mansion using a side door she'd noticed during her wanderings, and called an Uber. The driver gave her strange looks. A young woman in jeans leaving a mansion at 1 a.m., but took her where she asked. Phoenix, Arizona was a 5-hour drive. The group home where she'd spent 3 years was in a neighborhood that real estate agents called transitional, and everyone else called dangerous. Grace stood outside the chain-link fence, looking at the peeling paint and bars on the windows, and felt something twist in her chest. This was real. This was her life, not marble floors and silk sheets. She spent 2 hours talking to a night supervisor who remembered her. Quiet kid, kept to yourself, never caused problems, and looking through old records. No leads on how she'd gotten to Phoenix. No mysterious benefactors or clues. Just a 5-year-old girl who appeared from nowhere and disappeared into the system. Grace was photographing a document when hands grabbed her from behind. "Told you someone was snooping around." 2 men, late 20s, smelling like cheap beer and bad decisions. One had her arms pinned. The other was going through her bag. "Nice phone," he said, pulling out her new iPhone. "This area, you gotta be more careful." Grace had learned to fight in group homes. She stomped hard on the first man's instep, drove her elbow into his stomach, and twisted free. But the second man was faster. He shoved her against the wall, and her head cracked against brick. Feisty. I like feisty. Then he was on the ground, and Evan was standing there, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. "Get out of here," he told the men, in a voice that promised serious violence if they didn't comply. They ran. Evan turned to Grace, his face a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I needed to know," Grace said, touching the back of her head and wincing. "I needed to find out how I got here." "So you came to one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Phoenix at 3 a.m. alone?" Evan's voice rose. "You could have been killed. I've survived worse neighborhoods than this." "You're not alone anymore," Evan shouted. Then, quieter. "You're not alone." They stood there, both breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly fading. "How did you even find me?" Grace asked. "GPS tracker in your phone. Robert asked me to." "Look, I know it's invasive, but with everything going on." Evan ran a hand through his hair. "Get in the car, please." The drive back was silent for the first hour. Then Evan spoke. "I get it. Wanting to know. Needing to understand your past. But you have to trust someone, Grace. You can't do everything alone. I've been alone for 22 years. It's a hard habit to break. Yeah, well, you're going to have to try because there are people who care about you now. And watching you put yourself in danger." He stopped, jaw tight. "It's not easy." Grace looked at him in the dim light of the dashboard. "You barely know me. I know enough. Something passed between them. An understanding. A connection that neither of them was quite ready to name. When they got back to the mansion at dawn, Robert was pacing the front hall, his face haggard. "Thank God," he breathed when he saw them. Then, seeing the blood on Evan's knuckles and the bruise forming on Grace's temple, "What happened?" "Grace went for a walk," Evan said carefully. "It got complicated." Robert looked at his daughter, and instead of anger, his face showed only fear. "Please don't leave like that. Please, I just found you. I can't lose you again." "I'm not a prisoner here," Grace said, but her voice was gentle. "No, you're not, but you're in danger." Robert's voice was firm. "I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I'm just going to say it. You're worth $500 million now. That makes you a target. There are people who might try to hurt you, kidnap you, manipulate you. I need you to let Evan do his job. I need you to be careful." Grace wanted to argue, but she saw genuine terror in her father's eyes. He'd lost her once already. The fear of losing her again was eating him alive. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll be more careful. I'll let you help protect me. But Robert," she used his first name deliberately, "you have to let me have some control over my own life or I'll suffocate." Robert nodded slowly. "Deal." What none of them noticed was Laura, watching from the second-floor landing. She'd been there all night, waiting. And now, as she turned and walked back to her room, her face held an expression that would have terrified them if they'd seen it. Grace was becoming a problem that needed a permanent solution, and Laura was very good at solving problems. Laura Pierce sat in her Mercedes in the parking lot of a nondescript office building in downtown LA, staring at the folder on her passenger seat. She'd paid Marissa Chen $15,000 for the contents. It was worth every penny. Inside were bank records, travel documents, witness statements, and photographs that told a story Laura had suspected but hadn't dared hope was true. A story that changed everything. She opened the folder again. Even though she'd memorized every page, the key document was a bank transfer from 15 years ago. $10 million from Robert Langford's account to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Below it, a second transfer 2 weeks later. $5 million from the divorce settlement. Both accounts traced back to the same person, Melissa Grant, Robert's first wife, Sophie's mother. Laura's hands trembled as she read Marissa's investigative summary again. Subject: Melissa Grant orchestrated the disappearance of her daughter Sophie Langford, age 5, on June 14th, 15 years ago. Evidence suggests Grant administered children's sedatives to the victim, drove approximately 380 miles to Phoenix, Arizona, and abandoned the child at a bus station during peak hours to prevent identification. Subject then returned to Los Angeles, staged a break-in at the family residence, and filed a false kidnapping report. Ransom demand of $10 million was paid by Robert Langford. Subject subsequently divorced Langford, claiming emotional distress, and relocated to Savannah, Georgia, with combined total of $15 million. The report continued with Melissa's current status: terminal cancer, broke, living in a modest apartment after burning through $15 million in luxury living and bad investments. The Spanish lover she'd run away with had abandoned her 5 years ago when the money dried up. Laura felt a rush of vindication. She'd known something was wrong with Grace's sudden appearance. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. But this was better than she could have imagined. Because if Melissa orchestrated the kidnapping, Laura could use that information, not to help Robert and Grace find closure, but to destroy the threat Grace represented. Laura pulled out her phone and made a call. "I need 3 men," she said when someone answered. "Professionals for a delicate job." The voice on the other end named a price. Laura agreed without hesitation. Her wedding to Robert was supposed to happen in 6 weeks. She'd been planning for 3 years. She wasn't about to let a lost daughter ruin everything now. She made a second call, this one to Savannah, Georgia. Melissa Grant answered on the 4th ring, her voice weak and raspy. "Who is this?" "Someone who can make your last days comfortable," Laura said. "Or miserable. Your choice." There was a pause. Then, "What do you want?" "I want you to sign some documents questioning Robert Langford's paternity of Sophie. Medical records suggesting you had an affair around the time of conception. Enough to create reasonable doubt." "That's a lie." "I know. But you're dying anyway, Melissa. What do you care? I'll pay you $50,000, enough for better hospice care. Enough to die without pain." Laura heard Melissa's breathing, rough and labored. She was considering it. "I'll think about it," Melissa finally said. "You have 48 hours." Laura ended the call. She sat in the car for a long moment, then opened her laptop and sent an encrypted message to the 3 men she'd just hired. The job was simple. Make Grace Mitchell disappear. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Make sure there were no witnesses. Laura closed the laptop and started the car. She had a wedding to plan and an heiress to eliminate. Back at the mansion, Grace was discovering that wealth came with its own kind of prison. Everywhere she went, Evan or another security guard shadowed her. Paparazzi camped outside the gates 24/7. Her face was all over tabloids with headlines like "Rags to Riches," "The Waitress Who Became an Heiress," and "Sophie Langford. Where was she for 22 years?" But the worst part was the constant feeling of being watched. Not by security, by Laura. Grace would look up and catch Laura staring at her with an expression that vanished the moment their eyes met. She'd hear Laura on phone calls that ended abruptly when Grace entered the room. She'd notice how Laura asked questions that seemed innocent, but always circled back to inheritance, legal documents, and how much Grace remembered about being 5 years old. "I don't trust her," Grace told Evan one evening. They were in the library, where she'd started spending most of her time. Books were one of the few things that felt familiar. Unchanged by her new circumstances, Evan looked up from the security monitors he was reviewing. "Laura. She's always watching me, always asking questions, and the way she looks at Robert when he talks about Sophie, about me. It's like she wants to strangle someone." "She's losing her position," Evan said carefully. 3 years ago, she was going to be Mrs. Robert Langford, with access to everything. Now there's a daughter in the picture. The power dynamic shifted. "You think she'd hurt me?" Grace asked. Evan was quiet for a long moment. "I think people do desperate things when they're cornered. And I think Laura Pierce is feeling very cornered right now." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Grace, I need you to promise me something. If anything feels wrong, if Laura approaches you privately, if you notice anything suspicious, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Like I tried to handle Phoenix." Grace's mouth quirked. "Yeah, like that." Evan's expression was serious. "I know you're used to taking care of yourself, but this is different. You're dealing with money and power now. That makes people dangerous in ways you haven't seen before." Grace studied his face. The concern there, the protectiveness that had nothing to do with a paycheck. "Why do you care so much Robert pays you to guard the house, not to worry about me specifically?" Evan looked like he was going to deflect, then decided against it. "Because I've watched Robert torture himself for 15 years over losing his daughter. I've seen what that kind of loss does to a person. And now you're here, and you're real, and you're everything he thought he'd never get back." He paused. "And because I think you've been alone for too long, someone should watch out for you." The air between them felt charged. Grace's heart was beating faster, and she wasn't entirely sure why. "Evan," she started. The library door burst open. Robert stood there, his face ashen, holding his phone. "I just got a call from my investigator," he said, his voice shaking. "About Melissa. About what really happened 22 years ago." Grace stood up. "What do you mean?" Robert crossed the room and sank into a chair, looking like he might be sick. "Melissa didn't lose Sophie. She took her. She orchestrated everything. The disappearance, the ransom, the whole thing. It was her. The entire time. It was her." The room spun. Grace grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Bank records don't lie." Robert's voice cracked. "She drugged you, drove you to Phoenix, left you in that bus station, then came back and staged a kidnapping scene. I paid her $10 million in ransom. She took another $5 million in the divorce. And she used my grief, my guilt, to finance her new life." Grace felt like she was falling. All this time, she'd thought her mother had lost her. Tragic, but not deliberate. But this was premeditated, calculated. Her own mother had sold her for $15 million. "Where is she now?" Grace asked, her voice hollow. "Savannah, dying of cancer, broke. The investigator says she's got maybe 3 months left." Grace looked at Evan, then back at Robert. "I need to see her." "Grace, no. I need to see her," Grace repeated, stronger this time. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. Why I wasn't worth more than money. Why she could throw away her own child. Robert stood up, crossed to her, and took her hands. Because she was broken. Because something inside her was twisted and wrong. But it wasn't about you, Grace. It was never about you not being enough. It was about her being fundamentally damaged. Maybe. Grace pulled her hands away, but I still need to hear it from her. Evan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. If you're going to Savannah, he said quietly, I'm going with you. So am I, Robert added. Grace nodded, feeling something hard and cold settling in her chest. 22 years of questions were about to get answers. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she was going anyway. What none of them knew was that Laura had been listening outside the library door. She'd heard everything. The investigation, the bank records, Melissa's location, and she knew her window of opportunity was closing fast. She pulled out her phone and sent a text. Job needs to happen within 48 hours. Double the payment. Make it clean. The response came back immediately. Understood. Laura walked calmly back to her room, poured herself a glass of wine, and began planning the funeral she'd attend with appropriate sadness, while secretly celebrating the removal of her biggest obstacle. Some problems she'd learned only had permanent solutions. Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what Robert had told her. Her mother, the woman who was supposed to love her, protect her, cherish her, had drugged her, driven her across state lines, and abandoned her like trash at a bus station. For money, the why of it kept circling in her mind like a vulture, was Grace. That unlovable, that disposable, at 5 years old. What could she possibly have done to deserve being thrown away? Around 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. She wasn't surprised to find Evan in the kitchen, making his usual late-night coffee. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, already pulling out a second mug. Keep thinking about her. Grace sat at the island. Melissa, trying to understand how a mother does that to her own child. Evan poured the coffee and slid a mug across to her. You can't understand it because you're not capable of it. Some people are just broken in ways the rest of us can't comprehend. Robert said the same thing. Doesn't make it less true. Evan leaned against the counter. I saw things overseas. People doing horrible things to each other. To kids, especially. I stopped trying to understand why. Some evil doesn't have a reason that makes sense. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug. But she kept photos of me. The investigator found them in her apartment. If she hated me enough to abandon me, why keep pictures? Maybe she didn't hate you. Maybe she loved you in whatever twisted way she was capable of, and still chose money over you. That might be worse. Actually, Evan's voice was gentle. People are complicated, Grace. They can feel love and still do monstrous things. Before Grace could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Robert appeared, looking as sleepless as they were. Can't stop thinking about it, he said. Joining them. How I lived with her, loved her, had a child with her, and never saw what she was capable of. She was good at hiding it, Grace said. Was she? Or did I just not want to see? Robert's voice was raw. Our marriage was falling apart even before Sophie disappeared. We fought constantly. About money, about my work schedule, about everything. I thought losing Sophie destroyed us, but maybe we were already destroyed. Maybe that's why He stopped, unable to finish. The three of them sat in silence, each processing their own version of the same tragedy. The moment was shattered by rapid footsteps. Marissa Chen, the private investigator, appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Her professional composure cracked. Mr. Langford, I need to speak with you immediately. All of you. Something in her tone made Grace's stomach drop. They moved to Robert's study. Marissa pulled out her laptop, her hands shaking slightly as she opened files. I found something else, something I needed to verify before bringing to you. She turned the screen toward them. Laura Pierce has been in contact with Melissa Grant. Robert went pale. What? Phone records from 3 days ago, a 17-minute call, then yesterday, another call, this one shorter. Marissa pulled up more documents. I also found wire transfer requests being set up from Laura's personal accounts, large amounts to offshore locations. And, she hesitated, I found communications between Laura and 3 men with extensive criminal records, recent prison releases, violent offenses. Evan was already on his feet. Show me those files now. Marissa pulled up encrypted messages that her team had managed to crack. Grace read over Evan's shoulder and her blood went cold. Job needs to happen within 48 hours. Double the payment, make it clean. Understood. Target confirmed. Waiting for opportunity. She's planning to kill me, Grace whispered. The hell she is, Evan said, his voice hard as steel. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. Wait. Robert held up a hand, his face hardening into something Grace hadn't seen before. The ruthless businessman who'd built an empire. We need evidence that will stick. Right now, we have encrypted messages that could be about anything. We need her to incriminate herself on record. You want to use Grace as bait? Evan's voice rose. Absolutely not. I want to protect my daughter, Robert shot back. The best way to do that is to put Laura behind bars where she can't hurt anyone. Marissa, can you set up recording equipment? Something discreet. Already done. I placed devices throughout the house yesterday when I realized what Laura was planning. Grace found her voice. So we confront her, get her to confess. Too dangerous, Evan said immediately. Everything's dangerous now. Grace stood up. She's already hired people to kill me, at least this way. We control the situation. We have security. We have recordings, and we have the truth on our side. Robert looked at Evan. Can you keep her safe? I can try. Evan's jaw was tight. But I don't like it. I don't either, Robert said. But Grace is right. We need to end this now. They spent the next hour planning. Marissa confirmed her recording equipment was active throughout the main floor. Evan positioned additional security guards outside. Disguised as landscapers, they decided Grace would confront Laura in the library, where multiple cameras and microphones were hidden, with Evan in the adjacent room behind a false bookshelf panel. When Laura came down for breakfast, Grace was waiting. Laura, can we talk privately? Laura's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation, then practiced warmth. Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind? They walked to the library. Grace's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. I wanted to thank you for being so welcoming. I know this situation hasn't been easy for you. It's an adjustment, Laura said carefully, settling into a chair. But I'm happy for Robert. He's wanted this for so long. Really? Grace sat across from her. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're losing everything you planned for. Laura's smile tightened. I don't know what you mean. 3 years you've been with him, playing the understanding girlfriend, the supportive partner, waiting for the wedding so you could finally access the money. Grace leaned forward. And then I showed up and ruined everything. Grace, I think you're tired. Maybe we should... I know you've been talking to Melissa, Grace said flatly. Laura went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Phone records say otherwise. 17 minutes. 3 days ago. What did you two discuss? How to get rid of me. How much she'd charge to sign documents questioning Robert's paternity. Laura's mask finally cracked. Her eyes went cold, calculating. You have no proof of anything. Actually, we do. Grace pulled out her phone and played an audio file Marissa had provided. Laura's voice on the encrypted messages. Make it clean. That was you, wasn't it? Hiring men to kill me? Laura stood up slowly. You stupid little girl. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? 3 years of my life. Pretending to care about a broken man and his dead daughter's sob story? 3 years of patient work, all destroyed because you couldn't stay lost. There it is, Grace said quietly. The truth. The truth. Laura laughed, harsh and bitter. The truth is you're nothing. A foster kid nobody wanted. You survived by luck. Not because you're special, and now you think you deserve $500 million because of some DNA test. I never asked for any of this. But you'll take it, won't you? You'll take everything that should have been mine. Laura's voice rose. I earned it. I spent 3 years earning Robert's trust, learning his secrets, positioning myself perfectly. And you just show up with a necklace and suddenly you're the princess. The bookshelf behind Laura opened. Evan stepped out, followed by 2 police officers. Laura Pierce, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Laura's face went white, then red. You recorded me. That's entrapment. That's evidence, one of the officers said. pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," as they read Laura her rights. She looked at Grace with pure hatred. "You think you won? Melissa is still out there. She's still your mother. And when you look in the mirror, you're going to wonder if you're capable of the same thing she is. That's going to haunt you forever." "Maybe," Grace said, "but at least I won't be in prison." They led Laura away. Robert appeared in the doorway, his face gray with shock. "I lived with her. I almost married her. How did I not see it?" "She was good at hiding," Evan said. "Some people are." Grace sank into a chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her shaking. "Is it really over?" "With Laura, yes," Marissa said. "But there's still Melissa. She didn't agree to Laura's terms, according to phone records. But she knows everything now, about Grace being found, about the investigation, and she's dying. Sometimes that makes people unpredictable." Robert crossed to Grace and took her hands. "We go to Savannah. We face her together. We end this completely." Grace nodded. She'd wanted answers before. Now she needed them. Not just for closure, but to prove Laura wrong. She needed to look her mother in the eye and confirm that she wasn't like her, that being abandoned didn't make her capable of abandoning others, that love could be learned even if it wasn't given. The trip to Savannah was postponed. Robert had urgent business meetings he couldn't reschedule. Investors flying in from Tokyo, contracts worth hundreds of millions that required his signature. He apologized profusely, promised they'd leave in 3 days. Grace told him she understood, but relief flooded through her. She wasn't ready to face Melissa yet, wasn't ready to look into the eyes of the woman who'd thrown her away and ask why she hadn't been enough. With Laura arrested and awaiting trial, the mansion felt different, quieter, less like a trap. Grace found herself breathing easier, sleeping better. Maybe the worst was over. She should have known better. The night it happened, Robert was at a business dinner downtown. Unavoidable. According to his assistant, Evan had reduced the security detail slightly now that Laura was in custody. Not eliminated, but streamlined. The immediate threat seemed neutralized. Grace was in the library, surrounded by photo albums Robert had given her. Pictures of Sophie as a baby, as a toddler, at her 5th birthday party wearing the sunflower necklace. Grace studying her own face at 5, trying to find herself in that happy child who had no idea what was coming. Around 10 p.m., Evan knocked on the door. "I'm doing perimeter checks. Keep your phone on you. Call if you need anything." "I'm fine. Just looking at pictures. Locks engage automatically. But don't open any doors or windows." His voice carried that protective edge she'd come to recognize. "Promise me." "I promise." He lingered in the doorway, like he wanted to say something else, then nodded and left. Grace heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. She turned back to the albums. There was a photo of Melissa holding baby Sophie, both of them laughing. Melissa looked young, happy, beautiful. It was impossible to reconcile that smiling mother with the monster who'd orchestrated a kidnapping. Grace was so absorbed in the photos that she didn't hear the library window unlock, didn't hear it slide open, didn't notice anything until glass exploded behind her. She spun around. 3 men in dark clothes and ski masks climbed through the shattered window, moving fast and practiced. One held a crowbar, another a knife. The third had a gun. Grace's foster care survival instincts kicked in before her mind caught up. She dropped behind the heavy oak desk as the man with the gun fired. The bullet smashed into a bookshelf where her head had been seconds before. "Find the girl. Finish it quick. Make it look like a robbery," the one with the crowbar said. 30 seconds and we're gone. Laura, even from jail. Laura had done this. She'd hired them before her arrest, set everything in motion. Grace's phone was on the desk, 5 feet away and completely exposed. No way to reach it without being seen. The library had another door, but it was across the room, past the men who were fanning out to search. She made herself small behind the desk, barely breathing, mind racing, 3 against 1, all armed. Her only advantages were knowing the house and desperation. The man with the knife moved toward the desk. Grace grabbed a heavy bronze bookend, some pretentious sculpture worth thousands, and waited. When he came around the corner, she swung with everything she had. The bookend connected with his jaw. He went down hard. Blood sprang. The other 2 turned. Grace ran. Not for the main door. too obvious. For the servants' passage hidden behind a panel Robert had shown her once. She hit the release, and the panel clicked open. There! The man with the gun fired. The bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Grace's head as she dove through. The passage was narrow, dark, and led to the kitchen. Grace sprinted, her bare feet silent on the old wooden floor. Behind her, heavy boots followed. They'd found the passage. She burst into the kitchen just as Evan came through the garden door. He took in the scene instantly. Grace terrified. Footsteps behind her. The blood on her hands from the attacker. "Down!" he shouted. Grace dropped. Evan moved like something unleashed. All his military training focused into violent precision. The man with the crowbar came through first. Evan disarmed him in 2 moves, drove an elbow into his throat, and the man collapsed, gasping. The second man, the one with the knife, was faster. He came in low, blade flashing. Evan blocked, but the knife caught his shoulder, tearing through shirt and skin. Blood bloomed instantly. Evan didn't slow down. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted until something cracked, and drove his knee into the attacker's stomach. The man went down. Then the third man appeared in the doorway, the one with the gun. Everything slowed. Grace saw him raise the weapon, saw it aim at Evan's back. Evan was turning, but not fast enough. Grace didn't think. She grabbed a cast iron skillet from the counter and threw it with all her strength. It hit the gunman's arm just as he fired. The shot went wild, punching into the ceiling. The man cursed, clutching his arm. Evan closed the distance before he could recover, disarmed him with brutal efficiency, and slammed him face first into the marble counter. The man crumpled for a moment. There was only silence and heavy breathing. Then Evan turned to Grace. His shoulder was bleeding badly, his face pale. "Are you hurt?" "No, but you..." "I'm fine." He wasn't. Blood was soaking through his shirt, dripping onto the floor. "We need to secure these guys and call police." Grace was already moving, using kitchen towels to apply pressure to Evan's wound. "You're not fine. Sit down before you fall down." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Someone, probably Evan's security team, had called it in. The man with the broken jaw that Grace had hit with the bookend started to stir. Evan moved toward him, but his legs buckled. Grace caught him. "I said sit down," she ordered, helping him into a chair. "You saved my life. Now let me save yours." Evan looked at her, his eyes unfocused from blood loss. "Valeu a pena." "What?" "Worth it," he translated, his Portuguese slipping through. "You're worth it." Grace's throat tightened. "You don't get to die. You understand me. We have a deal about coffee at 2 a.m. You don't get to break it." Evan smiled weakly. "Bossy. You haven't seen anything yet." Police flooded through the doors. Paramedics appeared, immediately working on Evan. One of the attackers, the one Grace had hit, regained consciousness enough to speak. "We want lawyers," he said through his broken jaw. "And a deal. We'll tell you everything about who hired us." "Laura Pierce is already in custody," one of the officers said. "Not her." The man's eyes found Grace. "She hired us, but there was someone else asking questions, offering money for information about you. Some woman from Georgia said she was your mother." Grace's world tilted again. "Melissa. Don't know her name, but she wanted to know where you'd be, when you'd be alone. Laura paid us to kill you. The other woman just wanted information." The paramedics were loading Evan onto a stretcher. Grace grabbed his hand. "I'm coming with you. You should stay here. Give your statement." "I'm coming with you." Grace's voice left no room for argument. Evan squeezed her hand weakly. "Okay." At the hospital, Grace sat in the surgical waiting room, covered in blood. Evans and the attackers. She was still wearing her sweatpants and tank top. Still barefoot, she looked like she'd walked out of a nightmare. Robert arrived 20 minutes later, his business dinner abandoned. He took one look at Grace and pulled her into his arms. "I should have been there. I should have protected you. Evan protected me." Grace's voice was hollow. "He got stabbed because of me. He almost died because someone wants me dead. Laura is in custody. These men will join her. But Melissa is still out there." Grace pulled back, looked at her father. "She's been watching me, tracking me. Why? What does she want?" Robert's face hardened. "I don't know, but we're going to find out, As soon as Evan is stable, we're going to Savannah, and we're ending this." 3 hours later, a surgeon emerged. "Mr. Cole is out of surgery. The knife missed major arteries, but he lost significant blood. He'll need weeks of recovery, but he'll be fine." Grace felt something inside her chest unclench. "Can I see him?" "He's still sedated, but yes." Evan looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. His shoulder was bandaged heavily, but his chest rose and fell steadily. Grace sat beside him and took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV. "You were right," she whispered. "I'm not alone anymore, and neither are you." Evan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused from painkillers. "Grace, I'm here." "Good." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "Don't go to Savannah without me. Evan, promise me." His eyes tried to focus. "Promise me you won't face her alone." "I promise." He relaxed, drifting back into medicated sleep. Robert stood in the doorway watching. "He loves you, you know that, right?" Grace didn't answer, but she didn't let go of Evan's hand either. Outside, dawn was breaking over Los Angeles. Laura was in jail. 3 attackers were in custody, but somewhere in Savannah, Melissa Grant waited, dying, desperate, and dangerous in ways they couldn't yet understand. The worst wasn't over. It was just beginning. Grace didn't leave the hospital. She spent 2 days in that uncomfortable plastic chair beside Evan's bed, leaving only when nurses forced her to shower in the visitor's bathroom. Robert brought her clean clothes and food she barely touched. Evan drifted in and out of consciousness, the painkillers keeping him under. Each time he woke, his eyes searched for her first, and only when he found her did he relax back into sleep. On the 3rd morning, he woke more alert. The doctors had reduced the medication. "You look terrible," he said, his voice rough. Grace laughed, and it came out half-sob. "You got stabbed saving my life and you're critiquing my appearance. Someone has to." He tried to sit up, winced. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. They said the knife missed your subclavian artery by millimeters. A few inches to the left and you'd have bled out in the kitchen." Grace's voice cracked. "You almost died, Evan." "But I didn't." He reached for her hand. "And neither did you. That's what matters." "Is it?" Grace stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, Los Angeles sprawled under smog and sunshine. "People keep almost dying because of me. Laura tried to have me killed. Those 3 men broke into the house. Melissa is out there somewhere, doing God knows what, and you..." She turned back to him, tears streaming. "You took a knife that was meant for me. Grace. Everyone I touch gets hurt." The words exploded out. "My mother drugged me and threw me away like garbage. Robert spent 22 years destroying himself looking for me. Laura spent 3 years manipulating him because I existed. And now you're in a hospital bed with a hole in your shoulder because I can't stop being a target. Stop." Evan's voice was firm despite his weakness. "Come here." Grace shook her head, but he held out his hand. "Please." She crossed slowly and sat on the edge of his bed. Evan took both her hands, his grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me. What Melissa did, that's on her, not you. You were 5 years old. You didn't make her abandon you. You didn't make Robert spend 22 years searching. You didn't make Laura greedy and murderous. None of this is because you're somehow cursed or toxic or whatever story you're telling yourself. Then why does everyone? Because people make choices. Bad people make bad choices. Melissa chose money over her daughter. Laura chose wealth over human life. Those are their sins, Grace, not yours." He squeezed her hands. "And as for me, I chose to protect you. And I'd make that choice again. Every single time." Grace's tears fell harder. "I don't understand. You barely know me. I know enough." Evan's eyes were completely clear now. All the medication fog burned away by intensity. "I know you survived things that would have broken most people. I know you're kind, even though life gave you every reason not to be. I know you threw a cast iron skillet at a man with a gun to save my life." He smiled weakly. "And I know that when you walked into this mansion 3 weeks ago, something in my life that had been gray started to have color again." Grace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The words hung between them, fragile and powerful. The door opened. Robert stood there, and the expression on his face made Grace's stomach drop. "What happened?" she asked. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. "Melissa died 2 hours ago. Cancer took her faster than the doctors expected. She's gone." The hospital room went silent. Grace waited to feel something. Relief, rage, grief. But there was only numbness. The woman who'd abandoned her, who'd orchestrated her trauma, who'd haunted her nightmares for 22 years, was gone. And Grace felt nothing. "I'll never know why," she said finally. "I'll never be able to ask her. Maybe that's mercy," Robert said quietly. "Maybe the why wouldn't help. Or maybe I needed to hear her say it." Grace stood up mechanically. That I wasn't worth keeping. That money mattered more than her own daughter. Maybe I needed to hear her admit it so I could stop wondering if it was somehow my fault. "Grace, you were 5. I know." The words came out too loud. "I know it wasn't my fault. Everyone keeps saying that. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. And right now, all I feel is..." She stopped. Couldn't find words big enough. "Empty," Evan finished softly. "You feel empty because the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally proved you couldn't trust the most basic human bond. And now she's dead. So you can't even get closure or justice or whatever it is survivors are supposed to get." Grace looked at him, and something in his understanding broke the dam. She collapsed into the chair beside his bed and cried. Ugly, violent sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. All the years of being unwanted, unloved, passed over. All the nights wondering what was wrong with her. All the ways she'd learned to be invisible because being seen meant being rejected. Robert moved to comfort her, but Evan shook his head slightly. Some grief needed to be felt, not fixed. When Grace finally exhausted herself, her voice was raw. Maybe Laura was right. Maybe I'll look in the mirror and wonder if I'm capable of the same things Melissa was. Maybe that poison is in my blood. "No," Evan's voice was absolute. "You want to know how I know you're nothing like her?" Grace looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "Because you're sitting here, crying over the death of a woman who destroyed your childhood. You're feeling grief for someone who didn't deserve your grief. That's not poison in your blood, Grace. That's humanity. That's the part of you she couldn't kill, no matter what she did." Robert sat on Grace's other side. "He's right. Melissa made you a victim, but you made yourself a survivor. Those are 2 different things. One was done to you, the other was your choice." Grace wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I don't feel like a survivor. I feel like I'm drowning. That's because you're finally letting yourself feel everything you've been holding back for 22 years, Robert said. "And that's terrifying, but you're not drowning alone anymore. We're here. We're not leaving." Grace looked between her father and the man who'd taken a knife for her. 2 people who'd known her for less than a month and were somehow more family than anyone she'd had in 22 years. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to let people in. How to trust that you won't leave or hurt me or turn into someone terrible. You start by deciding that the possibility of pain is worth the certainty of connection," Evan said. "That's what I decided, in Iraq. I watched people I cared about die, and I came home and decided never to care that deeply again. It was safer, emptier, but safer." He met her eyes. "And then you walked into that mansion, and I realized I was just existing, not living, and I'd rather risk the pain of loving people than spend another 15 years that numb. Loving people." Grace's voice caught on the words. Evan didn't look away. "Yeah, loving people. Specifically, loving you." The machines monitoring his heart rate beeped slightly faster. Robert coughed and suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. "You don't have to say anything," Evan continued. "I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're fighting, I'm here. We're here. And that's not going to change because things get hard or scary or complicated." Grace reached out and took his hand again. "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. I don't have any reference point. But when you were in surgery, and I didn't know if you'd make it, something inside me broke and I think..." She stopped, searching for words. "I think that might be what people mean when they talk about caring about someone. That's a start," Evan said softly. Robert stood up quietly. "I'm going to give you 2 some privacy, Grace. When you're ready, We need to talk about Savannah, about what happens next." After he left, Grace and Evan sat in silence, outside the window. The city moved on, indifferent to their pain and their tentative hope. "I'm scared," Grace finally said. "Of what?" "Of being happy. Every time I've had something good, it got taken away. What if this—" She gestured between them. "What if this is just setting me up for worse pain later?" "It might be," Evan admitted. "That's the risk. But Grace, the alternative is spending your whole life protecting yourself from pain by never letting anyone matter. And that's not protection. That's just a different kind of death." Grace thought about Melissa, dying alone in Savannah with no one who cared. About Laura, locked in a cell with only her bitterness. About all the ways people tried to protect themselves by hurting others first. "I don't want to be them," she whispered. "Then don't be." Evan squeezed her hand. "Choose different. Choose risk. Choose love. Choose us." Grace nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not healing. That would take time, but maybe the beginning of it. The first crack in the armor she'd worn for 22 years. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise, but it was a choice. And for now, that was enough. Laura Pierce's trial was a media sensation. "Black widow attorney attempts murder of stepdaughter," screamed the headlines. Court TV covered every moment. Grace refused to watch any of it. But she had to testify. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, Robert's business associates showing support. Laura sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, her hair perfect, her expression carefully neutral. But when Grace walked in, something vicious flashed in Laura's eyes. Grace took the stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Marissa. Though Grace had wondered, she led Grace through the story methodically. The DNA results, Laura's increasing hostility, the encrypted messages, the final confrontation in the library. "And what did Mrs. Pierce say to you during that confrontation?" Patricia asked. Grace recited it from memory. She said, "I spent 3 years earning Robert's trust, learning his secrets, positioning myself perfectly, and you just show up with a necklace and suddenly you're the princess." Did she admit to hiring the men who attacked you? Not directly, but when I accused her of it, she didn't deny it. She said I was stupid and that I'd cost her 3 years of her life. Laura's attorney, a slick man in his 50s, tried to shake Grace's testimony during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Mitchell, or should I say Langford, that you had everything to gain from discrediting my client, that eliminating her meant you'd have exclusive access to your father's fortune?" Grace looked at him calmly. "I didn't want the fortune. I still don't. I wanted not to be murdered. But you can't prove my client actually hired those men, can you? The encrypted messages could have been about anything. Your client confessed on tape." Patricia interrupted. Standing, "The defense has heard the recordings. This line of questioning is wasting the court's time." The judge agreed. The real bombshell came when one of the hired attackers, the one Grace had hit with the bookend, whose jaw was now wired shut, took the stand as a prosecution witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. He testified that Laura had contacted him through an intermediary 4 weeks ago, offering $50,000 to eliminate a problem. She'd provided photos of Grace, her schedule, information about the mansion's security. She'd specified it needed to look like a robbery. "Did Miss Pierce ever express why she wanted Grace Mitchell dead?" Patricia asked. "Yeah," said the girl was going to ruin her life, take everything she'd worked for. She wanted it done before her wedding. He looked at Laura without remorse. Said to make sure the body couldn't be identified right away. Give her time to play the grieving stepmother. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to use his gavel to restore order. When it was Laura's turn to testify, her attorney advised against it. But Laura, in one final display of arrogance, insisted. She took the stand with practiced poise, ready to charm the jury. But Patricia Chen was merciless. "Mrs. Pierce, how long have you known Robert Langford?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, did you come to understand his financial situation?" Objection. Relevance. Laura's attorney said. "I'm establishing motive, Your Honor." Overruled. "Answer the question. Mrs. Pierce. Laura's jaw tightened. Yes, Robert is a wealthy man, obviously. I was aware of that. And you were aware that he'd never stopped searching for his missing daughter. That if she were ever found, she'd be entitled to a substantial inheritance. Yes, but I never thought... You never thought she'd actually be found, did you? You thought you were safe, that Robert would remain a grieving, vulnerable man you could manipulate into marriage, giving you access to his fortune. Patricia's voice was steel. And then Grace appeared, and your carefully constructed plan fell apart. That's not... I loved Robert. Did you? Patricia pulled out a document. Is this your signature on a prenuptial agreement you secretly had drafted 3 months ago? One that would have entitled you to $200 million in the event of divorce after just 1 year of marriage. Laura's face went white. It's standard procedure. Standard for someone planning a long-term marriage, or standard for someone planning a quick, profitable exit? Patricia didn't wait for an answer. You spent 3 years positioning yourself to access Robert Langford's fortune when his daughter reappeared and threatened that plan. You hired 3 men to murder her. That's not love, Miss Pierce. That's premeditated greed. The jury took 4 hours to deliberate. They came back with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Attempted murder. Fraud. The judge sentenced Laura to 25 years without possibility of parole. As they led her away in handcuffs, Laura looked at Grace one final time. You think you won? You're damaged goods. You'll never be normal. You'll never be whole. And everyone around you will figure that out eventually. Grace didn't respond. She just watched as they took Laura away, and felt nothing but pity. 2 weeks later, Grace stood outside a modest apartment building in Savannah, Georgia. Robert and Evan flanked her, Evan's arm still in a sling from his injury, but he'd insisted on coming. You don't have to do this, Robert said. She's gone. You don't owe her anything. I'm not doing it for her, Grace said. I'm doing it for me. Melissa's apartment had been sealed after her death. The landlord had given Robert permission to collect any personal effects before the state disposed of everything. The apartment was depressing. Small, dark, smelling of sickness and old cigarettes. Cancer medications littered the bathroom. The furniture was secondhand, the walls bare except for water stains. In the bedroom closet, Grace found what she was looking for. A shoebox, hidden under winter coats Melissa would never wear again. Inside, photos, dozens of them. Sophie at 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, the birthday party with the sunflower necklace, Christmas mornings, random Tuesday afternoons, and underneath the photos, newspaper clippings, every article about Sophie's disappearance, every update on the investigation, every interview Robert gave, begging for information, offering rewards. Melissa had kept track for 15 years. She'd kept track of the damage she'd caused. Grace sank onto the bed, photos spreading around her. She kept them. Maybe guilt, Robert said quietly. Maybe regret. Maybe just proof of what she'd done. Evan picked up one photo, Sophie laughing, being lifted in the air by Robert, both of them bright with joy. This was before everything broke. Grace found a letter at the bottom of the box. It was addressed to Sophie in Melissa's handwriting, but never sent. The postmark was from 8 years ago. With shaking hands, Grace opened it. Sophie, I don't expect you to ever read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve to write your name. But the cancer is back, and I'm afraid I'll die without saying what I should have said 22 years ago. I was broken. I was selfish. I was so consumed by my own wants that I couldn't see what I was destroying. Your father wasn't perfect, but he loved you completely, and I took you from him because I was angry, because I wanted to hurt him, because I convinced myself I deserved more than what I had. I drugged you and left you in that bus station, and I have lived with that image every single day since. You, confused and scared, clutching that necklace I gave you hours before. I told myself you'd be found quickly, adopted by someone better. I told myself I was setting you free from our failing marriage. Those were lies. I was setting myself free. And I destroyed 3 lives to do it. Yours, your father's, and my own. I spent the money. I lived well for a while. But every luxury was ashes. Every moment of peace was interrupted by your face in my dreams. I tried to forget. I tried to justify. But some sins don't wash away. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope it also means you found your way home. I hope your father found you. I hope you're loved and whole and everything I failed to let you be. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. But I'm sorry anyway. Grace read it twice, then a third time. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. Grace. Robert's voice was thick with his own tears. She was sorry. Grace's voice was hollow, but she was still a coward. She wrote this letter and never sent it. Never tried to make it right. Just kept it in a box like some pathetic memorial to her own guilt. Some people can't face what they've done, Evan said quietly. Grace stood up, wiping her eyes. She folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. I'm keeping the photos. Not for her. For me. So I remember where I came from. But the letter stays here. You're not going to take it? Robert asked. No. Grace's voice was firm. She doesn't get to absolve herself through my forgiveness. She made her choices. She lived with them, and now they die with her. They left the apartment building as sunset painted Savannah in gold and amber. Robert put his arm around Grace's shoulders. I'm proud of you, he said. For what? For being stronger than anyone should have to be. For choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in her damage. Grace leaned into her father's embrace. I had help. That night, they stayed in a Savannah hotel. Grace sat on the balcony, watching the river, processing everything. Evan joined her, bringing coffee even though it was late. How are you? He asked. Tired? Sad? Relieved? Grace took the coffee. All of it at once. That's allowed? They sat in comfortable silence. Then Grace spoke. Laura was wrong. About me being damaged goods. I am damaged, but that doesn't mean I'm broken beyond repair. No, Evan agreed. It means you're human. We're all damaged in different ways. The question isn't whether we have scars, it's what we do with them. Grace looked at him. What are you doing with yours? Still figuring that out? Evan smiled slightly. But I think maybe loving someone who understands damage is a start. Grace's hand found his. Yeah, I think maybe it is. 3 days after Laura's sentencing, Grace stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back was familiar and foreign at once. Same almond eyes, same brown curls, but something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just Grace Mitchell anymore. Wasn't quite Sophie Langford either. She was something in between. Still being defined, the sunflower necklace caught the light. Grace unclasped it slowly, holding the silver pendant in her palm. 22 years she'd worn this. Her only connection to a past she couldn't remember. Now she knew its history. A birthday gift from a father who loved her. Worn the day a mother betrayed her. It was time to let it go. You ready? Robert appeared in the doorway. He'd aged in the past month. New lines around his eyes, gray creeping through his hair. But there was something lighter about him too. Like a weight he'd carried for 2 decades had finally been set down. Almost. Grace pocketed the necklace. Is Evan waiting downstairs, complaining that we're fussing over him too much? Robert smiled. He's cleared by doctors, but I still think this is too soon. Try telling him that. I did. He told me exactly where I could shove my concerns. Grace laughed despite herself. That sounds like him. The drive to Savannah took them through changing landscapes. California's dry hills giving way to desert, then gradually to the green humidity of Georgia. They took Robert's private jet to save time. But Grace found herself wishing for the longer drive. More time to prepare for what came next. Evan sat beside her on the plane, his injured arm still stiff but healing. He'd been quiet since they left Los Angeles, lost in thoughts he hadn't shared. What are you thinking? Grace asked. That I've seen a lot of death. Combat, casualties, people I couldn't save. He turned to look at her. But I've never had to face the grave of someone who destroyed someone I care about. I don't know what to feel. Join the club. Grace stared out at clouds. Part of me wants to scream at a tombstone. Part of me wants to feel nothing. And part of me... She stopped. Part of you wants to understand. Evan finished. Yeah. Is that crazy? Wanting to understand the woman who threw me away? No. It's human. Evan took her hand. But Grace, you need to accept that you might not get understanding. Some people's choices don't make sense because they weren't thinking clearly or rationally. They were just broken. Robert looked up from his laptop across the aisle. Melissa was broken long before Sophie was born. I see that now. There were signs. Her spending, her affairs, the way she'd disappear for days without explanation. I told myself I could fix her, that having a child would settle her. His voice was heavy with old guilt. I was wrong. You can't fix people who don't want to be fixed, Grace said. No, but I could have protected you better. I should have seen what she was capable of. Robert, Grace's voice was firm. We've been over this. You're not responsible for what Melissa did, just like I'm not responsible for being abandoned. We have to stop carrying guilt that belongs to her. Robert nodded, but Grace could see the struggle in his face. Letting go of guilt was easy to say, harder to do. They landed in Savannah in late afternoon. The city was beautiful. Historic buildings dripping with Spanish moss, cobblestone streets, the Savannah River reflecting golden light. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, Grace felt a tightness in her chest that made breathing difficult. The cemetery was old, established in the 1800s, full of elaborate monuments and family crypts. Melissa's grave was newer, simpler, a flat marker with her name, dates, and nothing else. No beloved mother, no loving tribute, just facts carved in stone. Melissa Ann Grant, 1969, 2024. Grace stood at the foot of the grave, Robert and Evan flanking her at a respectful distance. She'd prepared a speech, rehearsed what she wanted to say, but now, looking at the name, all her planned words evaporated. I don't know what to call you, she said finally, her voice quiet. Mother feels wrong. Melissa feels too formal. You're just the woman who gave birth to me and then decided I wasn't worth keeping. The cemetery was silent, except for wind through trees. I came here thinking I needed closure, thinking if I stood at your grave and said the right words, I'd finally be free of you. Grace's hands clenched. But that's not how trauma works, is it? You don't get neat endings. You don't get resolution tied up with a bow. She pulled the sunflower necklace from her pocket, held it up to catch the light. This was all I had of you, of Sophie, of who I was supposed to be. I've worn it every day for 22 years like a talisman. Like if I just held onto it hard enough, someone would recognize it and take me home. Grace's voice cracked. And that's exactly what happened. Robert recognized it, and it brought me back to a life I don't remember, to a father I didn't know, to money and privilege I never wanted. She knelt, placing the necklace on the grave marker. So here, you can have it back, because I don't need it anymore. I don't need a piece of jewelry to tell me who I am. I'm not Sophie Langford, frozen at 5 years old. I'm not Grace Mitchell, the foster kid nobody wanted. I'm something new, something I get to define. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. You took everything from me, my childhood, my identity, my sense of safety. You taught me that the person who should love me most could hurt me worst. And I've spent 22 years believing that if my own mother couldn't love me, nobody could. She stood up, wiping her eyes. But you were wrong. Robert loves me. Not because I'm Sophie, but because I'm his daughter, and I'm here, Evan. Her voice softened. Evan loves me even though I'm terrified of letting him close. Even though I'm damaged and difficult and still learning how to trust. She looked back at them briefly, then returned to the grave. You taught me I was unlovable. They're teaching me I was wrong. Grace's hands were shaking, but she pressed on. I'll never forgive you. I want you to know that. Wherever you are, whatever comes after this, I'll never forgive what you did. But I'm also not going to let your choices define the rest of my life. You took 22 years. You don't get another day. She picked up the necklace from the grave, held it for a moment, then let it fall back onto the cold stone. Goodbye. Melissa, I hope whatever made you so broken finds peace. But that's not my responsibility anymore. Grace turned and walked toward Robert and Evan. Robert opened his arms and she walked into them, letting her father hold her while she cried. Evan's hand rested on her shoulder, solid and steady. I'm proud of you, Robert whispered. That took incredible strength. I don't feel strong. I feel empty. Empty makes room for new things, Evan said quietly. Better things. They stayed like that until Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Can we go? I don't want to be here anymore." As they walked toward the car, Grace glanced back once. The sunflower necklace glinted on Melissa's grave, a final offering to a woman who'd never deserved it. But something else caught her eye. A figure standing near a tree about 50 yards away, watching them. An older woman, maybe 70, with gray hair and a face Grace didn't recognize, but there was something familiar about her eyes. "Did you see that?" Grace asked, turning to point. But the woman was gone, vanished between the tombstones like a ghost. "See what?" Robert followed her gaze. "Nothing," I thought. "Never mind." But as they drove away, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that the woman had been important somehow, that there was still a piece of the story she didn't know. Back at their hotel, Robert made calls about the Sophie Langford Foundation he was establishing. Evan reviewed security protocols, still overprotective despite Grace's eye rolls, and Grace sat on the balcony, watching Savannah's historic district glow under streetlights. Her phone buzzed, an email from an unknown address with no subject line. Grace almost deleted it, but something made her open it. Inside was a single photo attachment. Grace clicked, and her breath caught. It was a picture she'd never seen. Sophie, at maybe 4 years old, sitting on a porch swing with an elderly woman. Both were laughing, the woman's arm around the little girl protectively. The woman had kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a bun. Below the photo, a message. "Your grandmother. She searched for you until she died 3 years ago. She never stopped believing you were alive. I thought you should know. Someone who remembers." Grace stared at the photo, tears blurring her vision. Somewhere out there, someone had loved her. Someone had looked for her. Someone had refused to give up. She wasn't just the daughter nobody wanted. She was also the granddaughter someone had desperately tried to find. "Evan," she called. "I need to show you something." The past, it seemed, wasn't quite finished with her yet. 6 months had passed since Savannah. Grace stood in the gymnasium of Lincoln Heights Group Home, the same place where she'd spent 3 brutal years as a teenager. The walls were still institutional beige, the floors still scuffed linoleum, but something felt different. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was knowing she had the power to change things now. 15 teenagers sat in a semicircle, ranging from 13 to 17. They had the same guarded expressions Grace remembered wearing. Arms crossed, eyes suspicious, waiting for another adult to disappoint them. "My name is Grace," she began, not bothering with her last name. "I lived here when I was 15, slept in dorm C, the one with the window that doesn't close all the way so it's freezing in winter." A few kids shifted, paying attention now. "I'm not here to tell you it gets better. That's what adults always say, right? It gets better. Just hang in there." Grace's voice was steady. "Sometimes it doesn't get better. Sometimes it stays hard. But here's what I learned. You get to decide what you do with the hard. You can let it break you, or you can let it make you stronger than anyone who had it easy." A girl in the back, maybe 16, spoke up. "Easy for you to say. You got out." "Yeah, I did. At 18, I aged out of the system with $200 and a garbage bag of donated clothes. I worked 3 jobs to afford a studio apartment with roaches. I ate ramen for dinner most nights. I was invisible to everyone around me." Grace paused. "And then something impossible happened. But before that, I survived. That's what I'm here to tell you. Survival is your first victory. Everything else builds from there." She talked for an hour, not sugarcoating anything, told them about the loneliness, the fear, the constant feeling of being unwanted, but also about learning to be resourceful, to trust her instincts, to find strength in places she didn't know existed. When she finished, a boy raised his hand. "What was the impossible thing that happened?" Grace smiled. "I found out I had a family, that the story I'd been told about myself, that I was abandoned and worthless, was wrong. But here's the important part. I survived for 22 years believing that story, and I'm still here. So even if the impossible thing never happened, I would have made it. You will too." After the session, Grace met with the home's director, a weary woman named Janet who'd been there since Grace's time. "The Sophie Langford Foundation is funding a complete renovation," Grace explained. "New beds, new facilities, a computer lab, a real kitchen where kids can learn to cook. But more importantly, we're funding therapy programs, college prep courses, and job training. Every kid here deserves a real chance. Janet's eyes filled with tears. This will change lives, Grace. That's the plan. Outside, Robert waited in the car with Evan. They'd offered to come in, but Grace had wanted to do this part alone. Some journeys you had to make yourself. How'd it go? Robert asked as she slid into the back seat. Good, hard, but good. Grace leaned back. I forgot how much anger there is in those kids. How much they're just trying to survive each day. You're giving them something I couldn't give you, Robert said quietly. Hope and resources and someone who understands. We're giving them that, Grace corrected. This is our foundation, Robert. Our work. The Sophie Langford Foundation had launched 3 months ago with an initial endowment of $100 million. Robert wanted to give more, but Grace insisted they start there and grow based on impact, not just money. They'd already reformed foster care documentation in 3 states, funded therapy programs in 12 cities, and created scholarship funds for aging out teens. It wasn't about saving everyone. It was about changing a broken system piece by piece, at the mansion, which Grace still sometimes forgot to call home. Evan had dinner waiting. He'd learned to cook during his recovery, claiming he needed something to do with his hands. Grace suspected he just liked taking care of people in quiet ways. Simone called, Evan said, stirring something that smelled amazing. She wants to know if we're still coming to her school play Thursday. Grace smiled. Simone, the 16-year-old girl Grace had adopted 4 months ago. After meeting her during a foundation visit, Simone had been labeled too difficult, bounced through 7 foster homes, written off by the system as a problem case. Grace saw herself in Simone's angry eyes and took her home that same week. It hadn't been easy. Simone tested boundaries constantly, waited for Grace to give up on her like everyone else had, but Grace understood that language, the language of expecting abandonment. So she stayed, threw tantrums and slammed doors and screamed accusations. She stayed, and slowly, carefully, Simone started to trust. Tell her we'll be front row, Grace said. What's she playing again? Scout in to Kill a Mockingbird. Perfect casting. Grace watched Evan cook, comfortable in their kitchen, comfortable in their life. She's coming out of her shell, because you gave her space to. Evan plated the food, some kind of pasta with vegetables that looked professional. You're good at this, you know, the whole mother thing. Grace's chest tightened. I don't know about that. I'm just trying not to screw her up. That's what being a good parent is. Trying not to screw them up and being there when you inevitably do anyway. Evan set plates on the table. You're giving her what you needed. That's everything. Robert joined them for dinner. As he did most nights now, he'd cut back on work, delegated more, made space for the family he'd thought was lost forever. They talked about foundation business, about Simone's play, about the upcoming holidays. It was normal, beautifully, impossibly normal. After dinner, Grace found herself in the library, her favorite room in the mansion, floor-to-ceiling books, the smell of old paper and leather, a window seat that overlooked gardens where jasmine grew. The photograph of 5-year-old Sophie still hung above the fireplace, but Grace had added others. Pictures of Grace at 15, awkward and guarded. Grace at 20, working her first waitressing job. Grace now with Robert and Evan and Simone, all of them laughing at something stupid. A whole life in photographs. Not the one she was supposed to have, but the one she'd built anyway. Hey! Simone appeared in the doorway, trying to look casual but clearly wanting something. Got a minute? Always. Simone came in, sat on the couch with studied teenage nonchalance. I was thinking about next year, when I'm 17, and the year after that when I turn 18. Grace's stomach clenched. Here it was, the fear she'd been waiting for. Simone planning her exit, preparing to leave before Grace could abandon her. And I was wondering, Simone's voice got smaller, if maybe I could stay after 18. I mean, like, not because I have to, but because I want to, if that's okay. Grace's throat closed up. You want to stay. You don't have to say yes. I know I'm a lot, and I know. Grace crossed the room and pulled Simone into a hug. Yes, God, yes, you can stay as long as you want. This is your home, Simone, forever, if you want it. Simone hugged back fiercely. "Even when I'm terrible. Especially when you're terrible. That's what family means." They stayed like that, both of them crying a little, both of them healing wounds they'd thought were permanent. Later, Grace stood in the garden where jasmine bloomed. Evan found her there, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Cold, a little. Grace leaned into him. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart. For this to be too good to be true. It's not too good. It's just good. And you deserve it." Evan's arm came around her. "We both do. I love you," Grace said, the words still new and frightening and true. "I should say that more. You show it every day. But yeah, hearing it's nice too." Evan kissed the top of her head. "I love you too. Even though you're terrible at asking for help, and you work too hard, and you still have nightmares sometimes. Especially because of those things." "Yeah, especially because of those things." They stood in the garden where the past had once haunted every corner. But tonight, Grace felt only present, only here, only alive. Robert appeared on the terrace, called them in for the dessert Simone had insisted on making. It would probably be terrible, but they'd eat it anyway, and tell her it was delicious, because that's what families did. Grace took Evan's hand, and they walked toward the light, toward laughter, toward home. The sunflower necklace was gone, left on a grave in Savannah, but Grace didn't need it anymore. She'd found what she'd been searching for all along, not in a piece of jewelry or a lost identity, but in choosing who to become. She was Grace Mitchell, survivor. She was Sophie Langford, found daughter. She was both and neither and something entirely her own. And for the first time in 27 years, that was enough. The wind carried the scent of jasmine through the garden, and somewhere in memory, a man's voice sang a lullaby. But Grace wasn't 5 years old anymore. She was here. She was whole. She was home. And that, finally, was everything.